So the recording and the presentation will be available in the share folder for Soteria Partner, and for the other, it will also be available in the Soteria website. And just note that this community of practice session is open to all participants, also not just internal participants of the Soteria project. I want to take this a few minutes or even seconds to briefly explain what is the community of practice. So in Soteria, the community of practice are a space for knowledge sharing among partner and also case studies. And every 2 months, we hold a community of practice where either a case study or several case study shares its latest learning, or a partner presents their progress on one of the output, like in today's session. And the community of practice help us to exchange experience, learn from each other, and stay aligned on key product development. So today, Jesus Soler from Aquatech will present the risk assessment guideline he has developed. So Jesus Soler, you are the task leader of 1.3 in the Soteria project, and you focus on risk assessment model and climate change scenario analysis. And as part of this task, you have prepared a set of risk assessment guidelines, and today you will present them. So I don't know how much time it will take. I think between 20 and 30 minutes, you told me. And then we will have a session.
More or less.
Perfect. And then we'll have a session dedicated to discussion, exchange, if you have any question. And that's it. I think, Jesus, the floor is yours. You can, maybe it's better if you share your screen, or I can do it as you prefer.
Yeah, I'm going to share. Hello, everybody. I'm Jesus Soler from Acatec. Most of you know me, but I'm here to explain a little bit results or a guideline that we have prepared within task 1.3. Task 1.3, it's a little task inside Soteria that the main goal of this task is to make like a big overview of the risk assessment processes in the insurance sector, but also in municipalities and so on, and try to find the best gap, the best practices, the gaps, the challenge that we focus, and then to develop or to create like guidelines on how to perform a good risk assessment. We have a main question here, that is, what is the role of risk assessment in the insurance sector and beyond? And another main question that we have in mind preparing these guidelines, this task, and this presentation is, why is risk assessment crucial? And for sure, how can a good risk assessment be conducted? These three questions, I think, are very, very, very important. But after all, I would like to play with you a little bit. It's easy with a Mentimeter. So can you go to the Mentimeter? And I have a question to know you better about your knowledge on risk assessment. Can you go to the Mentimeter, to Mentimeter, or go to the using this correct code with your mobile phones? Here, what comes to mind when you hear about risk assessment? We have several opinions here with 347. Put here things that we will see damage. We will see also insurance, risk reduction. There is some more topics or words that come to mind when think about risk assessment. Damage prevention. So I think we have a clear idea of what is the main words of risk assessment. No? So anyone has another word to add to this, to risk assessment? Infrastructure, yeah, interesting. Infrastructure, risk reduction, insurance, damage, prevention. So let's move. Impacts, yeah, nice. All these terms we are mitigation, all these terms we are going to explore during this presentation and also in the risk assessment guidelines. Infrastructure, impacts, mitigation, insurance, prevention, damage, risk reduction. More or less, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to return to the presentation. Can you see my presentation now? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you, because I can see the when I'm in the presentation move the Zoom. So yeah, we saw that we have these terms. So first, I would like to explain what are our main goal, no, to during this task and the risk assessment guidelines and the process that we follow. And not at the beginning, the main the main thing that we want to explore is the risk and losses data. So what data do we have? Public data, insurance company data, and then we would like to collect what we have here. What we have, the data collections and the sharing methods that the insurance sectors, the municipalities, the national agencies are using. Also, the risk assessment methodologies that they are using in the world, and also the damage curves. I will explain what are damage curves, but we try to gather, to collect all this information regarding this, and then to perform a diagnosis, to analyze this data collection, the risk assessment methodology, the damage curves that are published yet, and to find what are the best practices in the sector, in insurance sector, but also in risk assessment area, and the gaps. Also to diagnose what damage curves that we have, and these damage curves for sectors and territories is enough. We need to work more on this, and so on. And also which adaptation strategies we're using and can be embedded to these risk assessment methodologies. The main goal at the end is to create the risk assessment guidelines that we are going to present in the next week, I hope. So when we gather all this information, at the beginning to collect, we perform a systematic review. This systematic review starts with academic papers, public academic literature that we found out, with a systematic review starting with a first initial query with several keywords. We use, we filter it, and we gather 500 articles, more or less, for sure. We cannot read 500 articles in an efficient way during the project. So we create like a Ryan screening in order to see what of this it's interesting for us. We cut the selected papers to 100 more or less, and with a thorough screening, we finish it with 18 articles that we think are interesting in terms of risk assessment, insurance, damage curves, and so on. And not only this information, we cross this information with another guidelines and report, starting with the recent PISA report. PISA is a sister project, also linked with insurance sectors. And this report, they have also an analysis of what are the state of the art of insurance and methodologies and risk assessment. So we cross also our articles with the articles from PISA, and to have these big resources of that. And so we cross with several guidelines, national, international, like the same day framework, or another European projects like ICARIA. And we use also, or we perform a series interviews with the insurance sector from the project, associated partners, Consorcio Seguros, ACI, DCI, KLP. So we perform interviews regarding risk assessment, what they are doing. With all of that, the literature review, the different guidelines of report, the interviews, we analyze what we have. And we arrive to some best practices and some gaps and challenge that we have in risk assessment in general, but in particular in the insurance sectors. Best practices. Fortunately, we saw a widespread adoption of the IPCC risk assessment framework. It's like a foundational strength. We see that more or less all the people who perform risk assessment, also in the insurance sector, have the IPCC risk assessment framework behind his rationale. So it is a very, very good practices. Also, we see that we have a variety of methodologies of modeling approach, from computational intensive catastrophic models, actuarial model based on empirical, a variety of modeling approach. We know how to perform a risk assessment depending on the context and depending on the resources that we have. So this is also a best practices. Also, there is a increased recognition of the multi-hazard approach. We are not tackling only one hazard. We are performing the risk assessment in a more holistic way, seeing different hazards that can act in parallel or simultaneously, or we are facing a lot of hazards. So we saw increased recognition of that. Maybe it's not enough yet, but we saw this increased recognition. Also, we say that some way they're integrating further local climate change scenarios. This is also a gap, but the climate change scenarios from, for example, the IPCC, this IPCC report, the models, the SSSP climate change scenarios. So we see that more or less their integration of that. And also, I think one of the best practices we have efforts by the ENDR with the same-day framework and other European projects and other European documentation and national documentation to standardize the hazard definition, the risk assessment definitions, to understand and to help the governance and to help the governance to perform this risk assessment. But we have gaps and we have a challenge. One of the main gaps and challenges is the data scarcity and quality. We don't have public, or we have a few public historical loss data related to high impact, low probability hazards. The insurance company, they have the data of losses for sure, but it's very, very difficult to obtain. Is one of the goals from this project Soteria. And we don't have a lot of events, historical events, in order to, for example, calibrate the models. So this data scarcity and quality is very important. There is a lack also of spatially explicit hazard values. We can see that more here, for example, in flooding, that is one of the most common hazards. We saw that, there is a flooding. The extent of the flooding is that, but we don't know the hazard values in order to perform the risk assessment or calibrate. For example, maybe you have depth, but you don't have the velocity. The velocity is a crucial factor also to calibrate and to perform a risk assessment and the impacts. So we don't have this. And for example, we don't have pluvial flood maps. We have several modeling of fluvial floods regarding to river, but not for the city urban floods. And urban floods, pluvial floods, are more or less 50% of the claims for insurance sector. So we have a lack of several hazards. And we are talking about floods, but if you go to another hazard, heat waves, the information is less common. So this is one of for me, the main gaps that we have. Also, we have advanced catastrophe models, advanced models, hazard models, and a very, very powerful tools. But this requires extensive and high resolution data sets that are not available. This is linked with the before. Also, fewer than half of existing studies in climate risk insurance fully incorporate further climate change scenarios, and fewer only socioeconomic development scenarios. It's not only to have in mind these future climate scenarios in terms of variables like temperature or precipitation, but also how it's going to evolve the land use of this region. We need to take into account this. We saw that we have fewer studies with that. And this is also a problem for the insurance sector. Like insurance sector normally works in a 1 year, 2 year contracts, so they don't need, or they maybe think they don't need to what is happening with the future climate change scenarios. But I think in terms, and we will speak for this to this later, in terms of business viability in the future, feasibility that the people can pay the premiums and so on. We need to have the climate change scenario. So I think it's very important. Also, many insurers that we have interviews, they are primarily relying on historical data analysis, the data that they have for damage. They don't have models. Or they are willing to develop models, but now they don't have developed these models to perform the risk assessment. They are relying on historical data. When you go to the reinsurance sector, you will see that they have extra models, and some big insurance companies maybe they have or they are working on, but they're working with the historical data. The historical data have the problem that for sure they have a lot of information, but we cannot capture the trends of the future because we will have a lot of variability and so on. So we have uncertainty in this historical data analysis. Also, there are limitations integrated events and tools like damage curves and they are not working or insufficient institutional partnerships for the development to develop damage curves. Damage curves, it's a curve that relates in a relation with the depth of, the variable of the hazard and the damage that the variable of the hazard causes. For example, in flooding, the depth, you can cross. If you have 1 meter depth, you can see with the damage curves with which will be the damage in monetary terms. So there is a lot of limitations in damage curves. And also another challenge that we saw, another gap, is that the low customer retention rates in most countries impede the implementation of adaptation incentive programs. Why? Insurance can promote adaptation measures to his clients if they can lose the client in 1 year, in 2 years. So they are not a clear incentive to push to put adaptation measures. This is maybe not exactly related with risk assessment by itself, but I think it's linked because the risk assessment can include or should include these adaptation measures in order to see what are the positive impacts that they. So at the end, with this analysis, we know that these findings underscores the urgent need for enhanced data sharing, improve the model sophistication, and for sure a stronger collaboration between public administrations and the insurance sectors. So more or less, this is the conclusions that we have during the systematic review, interviews, literature, academic papers, guidelines, so on. And now, once we have what are the gaps of the challenge, we develop these risk assessment frameworks that it's like a guidelines how to perform a good risk assessment. We are not inventing anything. All that we have is to see what are in the world, in Europe, in most concrete, and to put here in a document in order to help the insurance sector, but also the municipalities, the governments, the regions to perform a risk assessment. And I would like to explain what are the process of risk assessment that we recommend to do. But first, we need to have clear several topics. Maybe most of you know these topics very well, but I would like to remark, I would like to explain in an easy way if anything is not familiar with that. So risk, when we speak about risk, we need to think that in the IPCC framework, but in the H framework, risk is a compound variable through hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. I'm going to put an example to understand what is risk and what is hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Let's think about a beautiful balcony when you have flower pots in the balcony. So you have the risk that the flower pots can fall down. So this is the hazard, okay? We have a hazard. These flower pots can fall down. And for sure, this is a risk. But this flower pot can fall down, but it's very different if a flower pot falls down in a big city with a lot of people walking below this balcony, or in a rural area with a few people walks below this balcony. So you see that the risk is not the same, no? Because this is the exposure. It's very different to have this balcony with the flower pot in a big city than in a rural area when nobody or 1 or 2 people in a week crosses below this balcony. But also, it's very different if this flower pot falls down. It's very different if the impact of this flower pot is to a strong middle-aged or young person that if it's fall down or impacts to a older elderly person, or because his capacity to overcome this impact, to recover from this impact of this hazard, are very, very different. And this is the vulnerability. So we have these 3 main variables: hazard, that is the flower pot; exposure, where the flower pot can fall, where we have the hazard and who are we impacting, and also the vulnerability. How is the people or the assets that we have exposed to? Can they have what kind of capacity of recover they have. No, so this is the three main parts that we have the risk and are very, very different. For sure, with the adaptation measures, we can act at different with different aspects. No, we can act to the hazard directly. We can fix it better, this flower pot to the balcony, but the risk is always there, lower, and maybe it's lower, but there is the risk also. Also, we can act with exposure. We can forbid the people to walk below this balcony. And for the vulnerability, we can act in a more maybe governance or politic way, but we can support the people that with a good network system, with a good healthcare system, we can work with these people or in order to reduce the vulnerability that they have. So at the end, the risk is the component. I'm going to tell the component of these three things: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And in the middle of that, in the cross of this, we have the risk impact. And then we have the resilience. The resilience is the capacity of the system to cope with these hazard events. So the resilience is a combination also. We can act to the hazard, we can act with exposure, we can act with vulnerability. The combination, this layer that can reduce the risk, is the resilience. And here is when the resilience, when we have this adaptation or mitigation measures in order to reduce the impact of the risk for a given hazard. So to perform a risk assessment, we have a clear idea what a risk assessment is. Join me in this trouble of how to perform a risk assessment. First, we need to identify a hazard. This is maybe seems too obvious, but it's very important. You can surprise how many I'm going to a client and so on, and they don't have a clear idea what are the hazards. So we need to identify the hazard. Also, we need to evaluate the intensity of the hazard. For sure, we need to know the hazard. What are the probability of the hazard, the intensity of this hazard, and then we can perform a hazard modeling. Hazard modeling can be a very sophisticated hazard model with a cost computational and so on, or maybe more simple. Depend of the context, depend of the resources, we can choose one other. This is a sentence that I like a lot, that are all models are wrong, but some are useful. We need to understand that the models, as they don't say that models, we use models to make to take decisions, to understand things and to take decisions. The model is not the reality. Always are wrong, but they help us to take decisions. So we need to forget that we use the models to take decisions. The hazard models are fed by current scenarios, future scenarios, and current and future business as usual. We do not do nothing or to see what's happening now, to have a baseline scenario to compare. And also, in parallel, we have the losses data. The losses data, for example, that can provide an insurance company or association. With that, with the hazard modeling, because in the hazard modeling, we have time variables of this hazard in terms of flooding, depth, or velocity, we cross this with the losses data, that are the damage that we have in historical events. We elaborate the model, and we create these damage curves that we will explain a little bit more later. And then with the hazard modeling and the damage curves, we can see and perform to evaluate the exposure and the vulnerability. In terms of infrastructure damage, the damage curves can provide us the vulnerability of the system. Then, with this exposure and the vulnerability and the hazard, as we commented, we have the risk assessment complete. In this case, we are focusing on insurance sector, on damage, not losses of persons and so on. We focusing on damage. We have this economical risk assessment. But we need to make another look that it's okay, business as usual scenario, adaptation scenarios. So to compare, in order to understand how is the impact of the measures and solutions that we put into the table. And with all of that, we make again this hazard modeling and the evaluation of the exposure and vulnerability and the economical risk assessment. And finally, we have a comparison between the business as usual and adaptation scenarios, not only for the historical data, climate data, also for the future climate data. And we can have a very strong relation reliable and robust risk assessment in order to understand what we have, what we can do, and what will be the potential impacts of the measures that we develop in this risk assessment. So also we can use, for example, in terms of the losses data or hazard model or to calibrate, we can use information that we have that they are public. But you can see that this is examples of case studies of Soteria in the terms of Valencia or Norway. We have several data repositories, but as I said, like the main gaps, I think it's not, we have a lack of several kinds of models, for example, pluvial models. Also, we have a lack of granularity of this data or enough historical events in order to calibrate the model. So we don't have much information. So I think one of the big gaps is we need to work to integrate all the knowledge that we have, all the data that we have in a more easy way and to work with that. As you see there, in losses is very difficult also to find. You can work in a class on Spain or Norway. There are good examples. We can work with the Consorcio Seguros or the damage of the events is not public, but the municipalities can work with that in the case of Norway. But this is one of the main gaps that we need to overcome. We can work also with a risk assessment. Valencia, we perform a risk assessment in order to see without this data, in order to see with DTM, with land uses, with meteorological data, we perform more or less a risk assessment to see what's happening now. So I would like this is the risk assessment framework that how we need to perform. What is the process of risk assessment? I would like to put also go to the risk assessment parts, like damage curves, future climate scenarios. And as you know, we perform the hazard modeling with the meteo data. We create from the insurance sector, and we will have this expected annual damage, for example. This is a probability term that explains what is the expected annual damage that we will have a given year, depending of the hazard. But what is damage? Damage can be a lot of things. We have tangible damage, direct and indirect. Tangible damage that are direct in the asset, contents, the vehicles. This is a very direct and tangible damage. Also, we have the indirect damage, infrastructure disruption, business disruption, or intangibles that are the mortality and injuries, the environmental losses, or indirect intangible psychological trauma, loss of trust in authorities. We are focusing for sure in the tangible damage, more in the insurance sectors, and more in the insurance sector in this non-life insurance that are the focus of Soteria. We are trying to, in this expected annual damage, we need to try to gather what are the damage directly from buildings, to vehicles, to infrastructure, and then what are the infrastructure disruption, the business disruption, also the cascading effects. So we can value that to put into the risk assessment. This is one exception, and the publication is a very, very nice publication regarding depth damage curves. This is residential depth damage curve for different countries. We will see that, for example, in Czech Republic, you can see that to increase the depth, you can increase the damage. For sure, these damage curves, if you have better data of losses and for the hazard modelings, you can be more accurate. For sure, it's impossible to gather in one curve for one country. We have a lot of context inside the country, but it's a starting point. We can work with that in order to have this expected annual damage in our risk assessment. This is in case of the study of Valencia. This is also flood damage curves regarding depth and damage for different sectors, warehouse, car park, restaurants, and so on. You see that we are focusing a lot of flooding. There is a lot of literature in flooding. In other hazards, it's very difficult to find this kind of curves. Also, 70% more or less of the damage for hazard is for flooding is the most costly hazard, so it's normal that we focus more on flooding. But this can be applied for another hazards, heat waves, windstorms, and so on. But we need to work in that direction. Also, I would like to comment briefly regarding future climate scenarios, because it's using the first, when I explain this hazard exposure vulnerability, around them there is a climate change scenarios. We need to see what are the future. And a few comments regarding future climate scenarios. We have the data to put these scenarios there, to evaluate the hazard that starting with, for sure, the GCM models that are global models that the IPCC report, for example, or climate, the Couple Model Intercomparison Project are using. They create some narratives that the CCSP scenario that the last report that is like scenarios that can occur in the future. We have more optimistic or positive scenarios that as CCSP1, or more pessimistic, or more or less the line that we have now that are SSSP3. And so the lower GHG emissions is the results of these scenarios will do in hazard intensities lower, and pessimistic, or I don't know if the term is pessimistic, but several scenarios like SSSP3 or SSSP5. So we did this information we have in a very big, how to say it, in a very low resolution, 10 kilometers, 100 kilometers per 100 kilometers. Within information, we need to perform a downscaling to adapt this data to the local context, to find resolutions of the hazard intensity, 5 to 10 kilometer resolutions, 5 kilometer resolutions, that with that we can work a lot. You can see this is the process of downscaling. Only to mention, there is two kinds of downscaling: dynamical, statistical. Some of dynamical is like a physical model. We work with a physical model, and statistical is using the historical data in order to correct the bias and to put there. Two of them have his benefits and has his problems, but there is a power tools, and we have information now. In several months in Europe, Eurocortex will be published. This is the downscaling, dynamical downscaling that we will have in 13 kilometers square meters. We will have this data of intensity and of hazards, and also we will have another viewers and other data repositories for national agencies and so on, that we can obtain easily these downscaling variables in order to use as a scenarios in our risk assessment. So finally, these risk assessment guidelines, we present two of the adaptation measures that we think are more useful now, or more practical, that are nature-based solutions, for sure. Nature-based solutions can add changing a lot of things, for sure. They reduce the risk. A system without an MBS, a system with an MBS can change a lot. They can do a risk reduction, and also they can change the vulnerability of the system and so on. So nature-based solutions is one of the, I think, most suitable solutions, and also provides co-benefits with impact models, and also the early warning systems, that they act more with exposure, because we are avoiding the people to be in the same spot than the hazard. So there is two kinds of adaptation measures that we are working on, and we can include also in our risk assessment one of them, reducing the hazard, and also the exposure vulnerability. They change things, but with the early warning system also we change the exposure. So conclusions, best practices. We have the IPCC risk assessment framework in the middle of the table that we are working. This is very, very good. Also, we have a very, very intensive range of models that we employ with a lot of tools depending on the context. So we have the knowledge there to perform a good analysis. As I said, we have gaps and challenge, the quality of the data. The advanced models are computationally demanding, so we need a good quality data, but also an invest of this kind of models. For sure, we need to incorporate to add to a risk assessment the climate scenarios to see the impacts of the measures, and also to increase. We have limitations in damage curve implementation, so we need to work together more with the insurance sectors and the people who have the data for losses in order to create these damage curves that can serve us to perform a better risk assessment. In climate change, we need to incorporate this climate change. We have the data in the last IPCC report. We have downscaling data in order to use, and also from adaptation measures, the recommendation to invest in NBS and early warning systems. So final conclusions is needed to collaborate between public administration and insurance sectors, because all of them have a lot of information to share with a lot of data quality. Well, we have. Also, we need to improve our data sharing or data collection, also to incorporate more the advanced modeling and with climate scenarios, and to perform a good risk assessment, to include also the adaptation measures, and to know better what is happening in order to take the better decisions. So thank you for your attention, and for sure we are open to all the questions or discussions that you will have.
Thank you very much, Jesus. So we have some time to take some question. So do you have some question from the audience?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what you explained, Jesus, is a very complex, data intensive ideal. But at the very end,
Yeah.
what we are dealing with in many cases is with either municipalities or sometimes regions that have limited capacities and resources for this type of exercises. So for those, what we can do that actually.
Yeah, I think the process is the same. We need to adapt the tools that we use in each steps of the process. I think, for example, in terms of hazard modeling, when we speak about hazard modeling, normally the municipalities and so on, oh no, it's very difficult. But I think as a simple calculation can be a model also. So we need to try what we have and how to perform. At the end, I think we need to have calculations behind our plans and so on. No, I think we need to adapt each part of the processes to our model. For example, in terms of the last 2 weeks ago, I went to a conference of modeling in Innsbruck, and there is a very very good session that explained that only 30% of the nature-based solutions implementation have some kind of model or calculation behind. So we need to avoid that. We don't need to perform a very extensive and advanced model to calculate an MBS, for example, but we can make some calculations. And I think we need to help to find to incorporate this process and then to find which tools we can use. But also, the municipalities may are overwhelmed, but to perform some kind of simple hazard modeling, there is a lot of consultancies. The knowledge is there; they can do that. The only thing is they need to have all this process in mind. For example, for losses, I think it's very difficult because work with these damage curves and so on. Now I think it's difficult to obtain this data, and maybe this part cannot be feasible now. This is in Soteria we're working on, but this is difficult now. But for the other part, the hazard modeling, the impacts, we had the knowledge with more willingness and to understanding the global process of risk assessment. I think we can do that. In more a simple or complex way, but I think we can do that.
I mean, my question is also from the point of view of policymaker, how precise I need to be in order to make a decision that at the very end will deliver some reduction on risk. Sometimes this knowledge is even in the traditional knowledge of the population or the actors in the, for example, farmers. There is a lot of knowledge in the farming community for reducing risk to crop production, for example. To my understanding and my experience, some of the big, let's say, maladaptation decisions are made by the ones that do not know the territory. Like for example, when in the case of agriculture, when an international crop company lands into a place and they actually do their standardized production practices without really understanding what are the potential damage they could do, things like that. But actually, the people which is more anchored in the territory, they are more aware, and this information, which sometimes is not only data, is also very relevant. So, how we incorporate this type of information into the system, which will reduce the cost actually, because it helps you to make a decision which much less intensive, probably modeling or. And maybe I'm saying a stupid thing, but.
With this from a good risk assessment without knowing well the territory. So I think in ideal world, to include a participative process during the perform the risk assessment is needed. To understand what are the challenge, because otherwise you can go there and maybe you are going to solve something that they are not needed to solve. No, the part for identify the hazard, I saw many times. No, that something that the idea is confused for the people. What are the main hazards? That is a basic question. No? So I think we need to work with the communities. The people who are going to perform technical the hazard modeling, for example. I think there still need to be people from the territory that can work together with the local communities in order to understand what's happening there. Because as I said, it's very easy to make a model. And know me, it's very easy. It's complex, but you can make a model from Australia to Valencia. A model, all the time, they are going to do results. But are the results reliable? Maybe not. You need to go to the ground. You need to go to the local communities. You need to check. Once you have a hazard model, you need to check with the communities. Okay, this is real. In your experience, this kind of solutions can work. The results of the model, do you think it's reliable? We need to work with, for sure, the local communities, the municipalities, and so on, in order to calibrate. Calibrate the model is not only calibrate with the data, it's calibrate with the main actors, to understand what is happening here, because at the end, as I say, the model is only a tool to take decisions. It's not a stone that we put the data. No. We need to take decisions. So I think it's very, very important to calibrate. I think in the process of calibrate the things, the local community, to design the process, to identify the main hazard and challenge, and to calibrate all the calculations, I think it's very important to work with the local communities with a participative process. In my opinion, I think it's difficult, for sure, but I think it's a.
So you mean that the models are useful actually to understand, well, for the users, because at the end the important part is the user. For the user, is useful actually to understand better what is the geographical distribution of things. But at the very end, in essence, for a particular hazard, if it's very limited, you may not need a very sophisticated model.
No. This is also another thing. It's very important to understand what we have. Depends of every case is different. Depends of the case. You can use, maybe you need more sophisticated models because you have a lot of interactions and it's very difficult to understand what's happening. For example, in urban areas, in terms of flood, you have network, you have several interactions that it's very difficult to understand what's happening there with the more advanced models. But there are some examples or some cases that some situations where it's not needed to go deeper, and also depends of the goals that we have. So I think we need to study very clear in each case what are the resources that we need. So maybe it's not necessary to go sort of very sophisticated model.
We have another question in the two questions in the chat. One from Rafael. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, or I can read the question directly.
Yes, I can tell it. It's no problem. Just I just want to say, okay, I know that you are doing a very good work in Soteria and also in Natalie, but my question is if you feel that recent events, catastrophic events like Dana in Valencia and fires and other situations across the whole Europe is driving a real change in the insurance sector and in public policies. My feeling is that it's time to make this switch, as you told, assume best practices and adaptation measure. But do you think that this is something that is happening right now?
Well, this is a very, very good question. Also very big questions. Maybe I cannot answer at all. In the whole sense, but I saw in this project in Soteria, and so I saw the willingness to do that. I think one of the main goals in this project, in this call, because at the end is the European Union that make this call for this project, is to, we need to involve the insurance sector here more. We need to change things here in order to, for sure. We saw with the Consorcio Seguros that here in Spain we have a very specifically insurance sector where the consortium is a public administration, insurance public company that take care of the the natural catastrophe events. So I think we have this shift of mind that we need to improve, including future climate scenarios, best practices to improve with adaptation measures. The problem is how to do it, how to perform. And now, more or less, the adaptation measures and so on, it's carried by the public sector. So also we need to involve the private sector in this table to close here to sit here in this table with the private sector, the insurance sector, and to see how to manage this, how to improve adaptation measures. So I think we are pushing. I'm not sure if we are fast enough. Maybe not. But I think we are going into the right direction. And as I mentioned it with Maria Jose, we need to understand that this risk assessment, for sure, I present here ideal risk assessment, but the process can be more simple. Can be the process the same, but with simple tools. So we can do something. We can do something on that. So yeah, I think we are driving a real change. I'm not sure the velocity of this real change.
So we have also another question in the chat from Berit. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, or I can read the question.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
No, thanks for a nice presentation. So I was just wondering. Measures and climate scenarios. Have been work. There's been a lot of work on that. But these damage curves, as you said, they are very limited. But how open and willing to share do you think insurance will be to be able
Yeah,
to
depend on the country. Yeah.
And to or do you mean that rather public? Should municipalities or what you say other public actors should these be made more or less as a collaboration effort in a country, for example?
I think depends of the country for sure. In the case in Spain, as is public, they share more or less. If you want, they share his data of damage. I think I think here the key part is the regulation, is the regulatory framework. I think we need to create policies in order to push the insurance sector to share his data. For sure, we discussed it several times, we are dealing with a lot of questions around that, but in a safe way to share with the municipalities, with the people who is going to perform the risk assessment. I think we need to work more in policies and in regulatory framework in order to force the insurance company to comply. I don't expect that a private company share his data because they don't want to do it. I understand that. So I think they need to come from regulatory perspective. If not, because at the end, we have done here in Spain, also in Norway, we can do it, and we can do it in terms with aggregate data that we cannot expose data or something that is so we can perform damage curves, but we need to create this regulatory framework to do that. Yeah.
Maybe we can take a last question from Alexander. You raise your hand.
Yeah, because my question, and thank you, Jesus, because it was extremely interesting for me, because you are the expert here. It's your field. Maybe I will try to move maybe from insurance to banking sector, because banking sector is affected in a way that they see already to which extent non-economic risk they are impacting their, let's say, their portfolios, and they have maybe even more information from the ground, because insurance coverage is not so good like in Norway, in other countries. But the banking sector, let's say we all have some kind of loans, like small or big loans, and the banking sector has this information already to which extent non-economic risks affecting already their portfolios, and they are already obliged to do this ESG risk assessment and risk management starting from the January next year, which means they will be looking slightly, let's say, beyond only economic damage curves. So let's say how maybe you see already new approaches or new publications where we can, or where I, for example, can take a look and see how these damage curves, they are evolving more into some kind of merged, let's say, approach where economic and non-economic is there already.
I think this damage curve is for sure focusing on damage, but I think we can, at the end, we are working, for example, in other European projects with multi-criteria analysis that take into account these damage curves and this technical risk assessment, but put in the same table with another indicators, another kind of impacts, not in the criteria analysis. I think at the end we need to go to a more holistic and broader risk assessment to take into account all the consequence that a climate hazard can have. And I think in the band sector we can see and we can learn also, well, there is a very opaque some things that I think we can learn and we can work together to find how to evaluate the global dimension of the impacts, taking into account environmental, social, economical, direct, indirect, in order to understand what we have and to take action. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question or comment or something, but is what I'm thinking. No.
No. It's okay. I was just wondering if you can advise or maybe share some links to the publications where those damage curves, they have already economic and non-economic aspects there.
Yeah, the damage curves for non-economic aspects, there is a few. The damage curves have extremely related to economics. We need to create. I think we need to create another kind of I don't know if in terms of damage curves that we should create another things. It's a field that we need to explore more.
Yeah, I wanted to
highly
make a
related
comment.
with damage. Sorry.
Yeah, make a comment in relation to answering Rafael, because I think if things are moving, that's a good question. I think we have to look into countries that had recent very damaging hazards, like floodings, fires, and so on. And if you look Germany, for example, that had big floods last 2 years ago, the first thing that they are doing is actually caring about centralizing the data and the information that will allow to have a more efficient way to alert the population in the proper manner, because the problem they had is already that they have debt, right? So, and that's a very important first step, right? To actually make sure that all your systems that will care about how to deal with populations during the event are well coordinated and well organized. That's very important, despite of if you know or not the risk. So I think we have to be aware that it's not only about risk assessment, it's about how the resources are now being diverted or distributed in what. And the what, the moment in the countries that are suffering these events a lot is on how to act during the event, right? In Spain, is happening something like that as well. In the recent state pact, the government is proposing that the whole constellation of parties should pact on having a national centralized emergency agency where climate change will also be dealt with for informing the population. And then there is another part, which is actually on how you do the risk assessments and how they cascade from national, European national to local. That's another very important point that the Commission is debating also very heavily, unfortunately not in a very participatory way. So we have the risk of having something that may be difficult to implement, the guidance that they may provide. And the third point I wanted to make is that my concern is that the banking sector and the insurance sector and the public administration may, because the urgencies start developing parallel. That's one concern, because we know that the banking system is already modeling. We know that the insurance sector has been modeling and now is trying to do forecasting rather than backcasting. And we know that the governments are also moving in that direction. So I think what it will be now crucial and very important is that these three paths cross. That's extremely important now, because otherwise we may end in something that is completely unmanageable, that is non-transparent, that is providing conflicting guidance, actually. So I think that's, for me, this is the big concern. So we are moving, yes. The problem now is that we need to move together. We cannot move in parallel. That's a problem.
I agree. I think it's more than, I think the knowledge is there. We have the capacity to do that. Is more that how we prioritize and how we can work together. Yeah, as I said, we in this risk assessment guidelines, we didn't invent nothing. Only we gather the information that we have with a more clear idea. Is to have, if we have a clear idea of that, yeah, it's a part of that, but this is more important than the other. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much all for this really interesting presentation, discussion, also the participant for your question. So we have to stop here because we already passed the time. And have a nice day, and thank you again all, in particular Jesus. Thank you.